Our headline for today's show looks at, I think, a recurring, active, persistent thread that we need to keep a close eye on. And that's the way in which TikTok exercises censorship. Now, TikTok is a bit of an anathema when it comes to social media, in that while they continue to be a juggernaut, it's partly because they have a different algorithm. They have a different approach to governing their platform. We talked about this previously in a segment that looked at the creepiness of the accuracy of TikTok's algorithm. But today we've got a paradoxical, almost a satirical story, but I think it's a bit of a tip of the iceberg, as it were, in terms of some of the issues that are occurring on TikTok. In this instance, we have a rather comical story in which TikTok censored a pole dancing PhD student who studies how social media silences women. So on the one hand, this speaks to a kind of paradox in which the algorithms have no ability to distinguish between what is research and what is violations of their guidelines. What is someone who is trying to explore a particular area rather than exercise in that area. But in this case, I think it's an instance of this researcher deliberately trying to provoke the algorithm and deliberately trying to provoke the censors at TikTok. You know, the subtitle here, a video of my ass gets demoted quicker than, say, extremism or trolling. And I think this also raises another issue, that many of these platforms are far more aggressive in policing sexuality than they are political extremism or political violence. But, let's read the first few paragraphs of this article, as we tend to do. Dr. Carolina R. of the City University of London researches how tech platforms moderate content. Last year, she published an academic paper titled How Instagram's Algorithm is Censoring Women and Vulnerable Users, but Helping Online Abusers. Now her concerns have moved from the realm of the academic to the personal. This month, R was censored on social media, in this case by TikTok, for her pole dancing videos. While teaching in the criminology, sociology, and journalism departments at one of the UK's leading universities, Eyre also teaches pole dancing at a London-based dance studio. She moved her pole dancing classes online during the pandemic. Meanwhile, R, who goes online by the username Blogger on Pole, posts TikTok videos of her pole dancing, a hobby she took up in 2016 while recovering from an abusive relationship. Now, this is where it's worth pointing out that fitness is a natural part of social media on all platforms. And there are lots of artists, lots of amateurs, lots of people who are exercising, who are sharing fitness tips, who are sharing general health tips. And, our later segment on the show, Religion of Instagram, is going to come back to that issue of health tips. But I think we should acknowledge that it's perfectly legitimate for people to be exercising and encouraging others to exercise, and that pole dancing is a very legitimate form of exercise. I would argue a cardio intense and highly skilled form of exercise that really develops both strength and endurance. And so this is an example, not of sexual content, but of the algorithms of social media platforms not having the nuance, lacking the capability, the sophistication to distinguish between what is sexual content and, in this case, what is fitness content. Now, the irony, of course, of our, being kicked off a platform, given that they research people getting kicked off platforms, I think is not unusual. I think, the more as researchers we understand these platforms, the more likely we are to exercise our rights and try to provoke an instance of censorship, to try to provoke, the platform cracking down on us, because we're in a privileged position. We're able to sort of provoke these responses for the platform and at the same time kind of bring attention to it and sort of not so much be a martyr, because having a video removed or even having your account removed, for many of us is not that big a deal. But like martyrdom, it draws attention to the cause and it draws attention to the injustice that's taking place. And certainly, that's true of TikTok as it is for any other type of social platform. And our notes that TikTok is as nasty a place as other social media platforms. It enables trolls. It enables misogyny. And one of the frustrations of the way in which these content restrictions are applied is there really isn't much room for appeal. There isn't room to talk to a human being and try to explain what the content was about. And I will assume that there's a kind of permanent record that TikTok sort of has, a running scoreboard of how you've complied or how you've behaved with the platform. So being cut off in this regard can be, damaging to one's long-term position on these platforms, but also frustrating because justice is so blind and you don't have a sense of how these issues are being treated. Now, I wanted to talk about this as our headline today because anecdotally, I see a lot of people on TikTok talking about being censored, talking about being shadow banned, talking about having their videos removed, talking about all sorts of mysterious ways in which a heavy hand of justice, a kind of shadow justice, permeates the platform and kind of haunts as a specter, whether your content is okay or not. And there's general confusion because, someone's content will be removed, but they'll see identical content by someone similar on the platform as if it's okay. And so it's hard to keep track of that. It's hard to get a sense of what is permissible and what is not. And I think, that's what can be so difficult in the subjective or arbitrary way in which this justice is managed. Our good friend Doofus Toomish points out that, their wife gets booted from Facebook all the time, and it only happens when she highlights racism in her post. And, that's an important point, that another arbitrary consequence of the blind justice that is applied on these platforms is that people can report you and get you kicked off, for arbitrary reasons. And usually if you report a racist, if you report bigotry, those racists and bigots will then organize against you and they'll start flagging your content. They'll start reporting your content and you'll get kicked off when in fact you were doing what the platform asks. You were helping the platform by, flagging content that they don't want, by helping to do unpaid moderation in essence. And I think that's what makes it so frustrating. Now, Dr. Carolina R. is an activist, is a researcher, and I checked out her Twitter profile to see if she was saying anything about her ongoing disputes with TikTok. But she was actually using her profile, using her channel to, bring more attention to some other people who are facing similar persecution. And in this case, Nikki Nine Doors, who is a photographer and an artist, as well as a performer, but whose Instagram has been a really important platform and stage, not just for Nikki Nine Doors photography, but for advocating on behalf of strippers, on behalf of dancers, on behalf of sex workers, and on behalf of women in general on social media platforms, because they often are subject to, extraneous and unnecessary censorship because they are creating a sensation, because they are getting attention. Often that attention engenders misogyny. It gets people falsely reporting and falsely flagging stuff, and it gets them kicked off. In this case, Dr. Carolina is, supporting Nikki Nine Doors and drawing attention to Instagram and putting pressure on Instagram because it was wrongly deleted. But, this is what is so frustrating about algorithmic justice, that there really isn't an opportunity to fight back. There really isn't an opportunity to say, hey, I'm not a bot, I'm a human. And I think that's something we should be concerned about moving forward. That we need to demand, human oversight. Like, on the one hand, I can sort of recognize why we would have algorithmic moderation, why on these large platforms it's just in their view, untenable to be able to pay people to be 24/7 moderators. Now, maybe we'll talk about that in our last segment today on unionizing the internet. But I can acknowledge that there is a role for automation. But that automation has to be responsible to human beings. There has to be a kind of court of appeal. There has to be a way in which if you are censored or if you are banned, that you can go to a human being and be like, come on, buddy, help me out. Like, can't you see that what I'm doing is legit? And to allow that to be public, the way a court trial should be public, and allow you to be judged by your peers. And I think that that's a crucial piece missing in our social media landscape, in this digital empire that is rising, that proves that it's a tyranny. That if there is no a system of justice, if there is no means by which we could appeal, then what's the point? And, you know, I could get myself depressed just talking about it. I'm as always curious to hear what you guys have to say in terms of whether you've experienced censorship or whether there should be some type of appeal. You know, that's where I feel that Doofus Toomish's anecdote about his wife is perhaps not isolated, that these types of incidents happen more often than we acknowledge, and we need greater research to sort of document the extent to which this social media censorship happens, and that it happens really quite pervasively.